My early life and experiences in the desert. I was born in Palestine. My mother was convinced that I would be a Messiah. Contrary to popular belief, I was not a saintly child. When taken to the temple, aged 12 years old, to be interviewed by the chief priests to determine whether I would be fit to enter Jewish religious training, I was rejected as being too opinionated. Bitterly disappointed, my mother took me home again and did her best to raise me in the sanctity which marked her own demeanor at all times. This was an impossible task, for I was, above all things, an individualist and unruly in behavior. I resented my mother's guidance and her attempted discipline. As a youth, I became unmanageable, a true rebel. I rejected my mother's staunch adherence to the Jewish faith and traditions, preferring laughter to sanctimonious attitudes. I refused to learn a trade, which would have bound me down to routine. I chose to mix with all and sundry of the poorer classes, drank with them, knew prostitutes, and enjoyed talking, arguing, laughing, and being bone idle. When I needed money, I went into the vineyards for a day or two, or took other jobs paying me enough to eat and drink and give me the leisure I craved. For all my many shortcomings as a human being, my careless, easy, indolent attitudes, my self-will and egocentric determination to think my thoughts irrespective of what others might try to tell me, I cared about people very deeply. I was deeply emotional. In your present speech forms, you would call me overreactive, over emotional. I had a warm, compassionate, empathetic heart. I was deeply moved in the presence of sickness, affliction, and poverty. I was a staunch supporter of what you call the underdog. You might say I was a people's person. I lived with them closely, in a spirit of camaraderie. I listened to their woes, understood, and cared. It is important to understand my true origins and my early youthful characteristics, because these were the goads which pushed and prodded me into eventual Christhood. What I most strongly detested and resisted was the misery, the sickness, and poverty I saw around me. It infuriated me, and I became passionately, vociferously angry to see people dressed in rags, thin and hungry, diseased, crippled, yet heartlessly browbeaten by Jewish leaders who burdened them with meaningless traditional laws and observances, threatening them with Jehovah's punishment if they did not obey. I declared to all who would listen to me that these poor people had enough to bear without being crushed by senseless measures restrictive of pleasure. What was the point of life at all if we were not born to be happy? I refused to believe in a just God according to Jewish traditions. The biblical prophetic warnings of Jehovah's judgment and anger against people disgusted me. People were human, after all, doing whatever their human natures prompted them to do. They had been born sinful, so why should they be judged and condemned to lives of suffering and poverty because they had broken the 10 Commandments? Where was the sense in such statements? To me, this Jewish belief depicted an illogical, cruel God, and I wanted nothing to do with him. It seemed to me that if such a deity existed, it followed that mankind was doomed to eternal misery. The simplicity and freedom I found on the hillsides, the plains, the lakes, and the mountains refreshed my inmost spirit and quietened my angry murmuring against the Jewish God. Consequently, I refused to believe a word that the Jewish elders tried to teach me. However, during my middle 20s, a new line of questioning took possession of my thoughts. As I walked ever more frequently alone in the hills, my rebellion was gradually replaced by an all-consuming longing to know and understand the true nature of that which must surely inspire and respire through creation. I reviewed my lifestyle and saw what suffering my actions had caused my mother and many other people. Although I felt such deep compassion for the weak and suffering, my rebellious nature had prompted much thoughtless and selfish behavior towards my family. My underlying love for them now welled up in me, and I found myself becoming equally rebellious against my past behavior. I heard talk about John the Baptist and the work he was doing amongst the Jews who came to listen to his words, even from Jerusalem. I decided to visit him to be baptized myself. On my way to the River Jordan, I felt exhilarated at the prospect of being baptized and starting a new life. I knew that, despite my unruly emotionalism, I had also been born with a keen intelligence and a gift for insightful, impressive debate, which I had used willfully and negatively, leading people into unruly arguments. I had thrown my talents away by pursuing a life of self-will, idleness, and pleasure. As a result, I had forfeited all respect from others. Neither did I possess any self-respect. For the first time, I found this to be intolerable. It occurred to me that, in the future, I could and must put my natural gifts to better use. Instead of just making a noise, perhaps I could find a way to lighten the burdens of those whom I so deeply pitied. Up to that time, I had been of little practical use to anyone.